All right. We got episode 7. I think it's just you and me again.
Welcome back.
The I'm excited. I finally have a haircut scheduled.
I'm
Been
excited for that
scheduled.
too.
The I should send you a photo. Ben basically was having fun with me last night. He basically gave me a top knot. I have a picture of me with a top knot, it all
Yeah.
pulled up.
Well, watch
It's
out.
it's ridiculous. It's yeah, nobody should see that. Um so I think
Well, we're in the midst of a Disney trip packing right now. So if there's some chaos that interrupts us today, it is the chaos of the preparation for the trip tomorrow.
are y'all driving or flying?
We are flying.
How long are you gotta be there for?
We'll be there from Saturday until next Friday. So almost a week.
So has Trump winning major ticket prices cheaper with Disney?
Well, they were already booked. So maybe next year.
Maybe you
Maybe
get
next year.
you get a phone call. Yeah, we've post election we've discounted your tickets to 10%.
Yeah, yeah. If anything, they would have gone up on my ticket prices. But that's all right. He'll put more
Was
money
it
in my pocket for the tickets next year.
was it Bob Iger? Is
Yeah.
still running? Yeah.
Yep.
I guess as long as you don't travel there with Elon, you should be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It'll be fine.
Well, I think today's episode will be probably relatively short, but I think we have no real agenda for today outside of just maybe discuss the impact that I guess the election is going to have or the new administration will have on development, real estate development, construction, design, etc. So,
Yeah.
um, don't necessarily need to go into the conversation of if it went the other way or not. Is just where Trump will be in for the next 4 years, and so what do we think is going to happen? So, because
Yeah.
that's what we're going to have to
Yeah.
adjust to. Good, bad, or ugly. Probably good. Just given that he's a developer himself, so it's almost like real estate developer's president again. So I'd imagine he's probably acutely attuned to the struggles or issues and hurdles and stuff that imposes on the construction industry holistically.
Yeah. And not just him, but I think, the people surrounding him have the same whether they have participated or actively been a part of real estate development deals. um I think some of them have even alluded to some of the things that will probably be impacted. You've heard Elon talk quite a bit publicly about deregulation, um, and I think that's certainly something that will impact. I mean, we've done a couple episodes already talking about regulation and how the kind of stress and strain it puts on our market. So I can see, if they're successful in helping to sort of deregulate that, that could definitely be something that's very positive for our industry.
Well, I think if you think about, I guess the big categories, right? So you've got, like you just said, regulatory environment, right? I think the
Mhm.
that's one kind of like big variable in like the equation of that impacts our industry.
Yep.
Another would be, tax policies themselves, right? So a lot of what propels continued activity in the real estate development and investment markets is this whole concept of like 1031 exchange and then how to deal with capital gains tax in real estate. So the tax code or the tax structure around real estate investing plays a big role in like if more activity is going to happen or not. Obviously we want more activity, so the
Right.
better tax policy, yeah, would propagate more
Well, and
work
there
to
are
occur.
programs. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Donald Trump had a significant role in the Opportunity Zone program, which is a program that I believe a lot of developers utilize, to get
Yeah,
some of
it
their
was.
projects done.
Yeah, it was. He was a big supporter of it. I don't think he was the actual creator of that. I think it was.
Yeah, I'm not saying that he was the creator, but I know he was a big supporter of it. I thought he played a role in getting it stood up, but maybe he's just
He
utilized it quite
did.
a bit.
No,
I've heard him talk, extensively about it. So I know he's very attuned to it.
Yeah, it
I didn't
was.
know exactly what his role was.
Yeah, it was Tim Scott, Republican senator from I think it's what South Carolina. So Tim Scott was kind of like the main guy, right? And then Trump helped him, and then promoted that that whole investment strategy, and basically took it mainstream, right? And then like
Yeah.
pushed it through and got it done. So I know, I would imagine that would probably back on the table to see if that gets extended, maybe even bolstered in some cases. Um, I would imagine that they would probably look at how to, I guess, bring a lot of offshore capital in the United States and invest in real estate. Um, to kind of
Yeah.
kind of like repatriate dollars into projects might be a good avenue to kind of like get the capital back, into the United States. And then also, he had a big role in HUD too on his first go around. Was it Ben Carson? I think he put Ben Carson in charge of the HUD, and then they made a lot of improvements with the HUD program, which I know a lot of other developers who access HUD dollars all the time, and use that system to do large multifamily projects. So that kind of gets into like another big major variable in how he can have an effect on the real estate industry is like like housing obviously is way too expensive for everybody. And so going back and dealing with HUD and then like some of this regulatory stuff, um,
Well,
he
just
can basically find ways to improve housing supply and the affordability of it itself.
yeah, and while you're talking about affordability, I think whether or not, I mean, I think there will be some continued, hopefully, at least that's what we're hearing, is some continued downward trajectory of interest rates, which will be
Well,
helpful as well.
Fed's just cut again, right? 25 basis
Right, right.
points.
So,
Um,
so I think we should add that to the list of things. I know we've talked about that recently, but I think again that's a thing that I think the election will have an impact on. That is a tool potentially for people in our industry.
well, especially on short-term interest rates. You'll see how that plays into a role with like 10-year and longer term rates. It should come down. I mean, I was talking about this with somebody yesterday, and they're asking me about it. And I mean, look, in theory, if you've got a downward trending interest rate, and I mean, it should positively affect the long-term rates, in the favor of lower rates altogether. So I mean, it's going to catch up in the longer, rates, but it should, which obviously, like if rates go down, we sell things at a lower interest rate whenever we're ready to sell our leases, which then in turn makes, we are able to be more profitable. At least on the deals that we are putting into action or putting into commerce at a higher rate because we've had to adjust to the higher rates. Now that they adjust down, then the opportunity to build more margin within those deals that we currently have is there's an opportunity for that, right?
Yeah,
Obviously, as the rates go down and new deals come live, they're going to be coming live with a lower interest rate, and it's going to start squeezing that margin again. But you know, lower rates mean more volume, so then you kind of make up the lost margin, the lost future margin with more volume. So it'll balance itself out again, but it could take
sure.
a few years. And then obviously there's a sustainability shift potential. right? I mean, I don't know. Um, I think, Trump is obviously not a front runner on climate change. I think he's a front runner on whatever makes sense. Like if there's, I mean, he's got Elon on his team, so Elon's big, proponent of sustainability and um, environment protectiveness, and so I think there's probably going to be,
as is RFK.
yeah, as is RFK. So there's probably going to be some potential concessions between that internal group on deciding what's appropriate, but I can see
Mhm.
some of the, I guess, just overreaching and erroneous regulations as it relates to climate change and sustainable requirements will probably decrease, but they'll probably won't be as much cutting out of that as a lot of people may think. Um, it probably may switch to more of like a common sense kind of approach evaluation to sustainability versus like pure mandates and um, impossible things to measure to for results. So that should free up maybe like some potential, like maybe some outcomes of that would be some land use and zoning restrictions in certain areas may get lifted or a little more easier to go and you know build projects on certain land, and um, that could help, especially with housing. So
Yeah, and I think there, if I recall correctly, in his last tenure or presidency, Trump was also a big supporter of some of the infrastructure projects that were out there. Um, I don't know how much that affects developers like you and I who play kind of in the private sector. I think it could add to the value of some of our developments. But there's, developers as a
well, I
whole.
think
Some guys play in the public realm a little bit more than others, and I could see some of these infrastructure projects being opportunities, in various ways for different developers.
well, if you think about like infrastructure, I mean infrastructure really is the core element of any society to advance itself, right? So
Yep.
if you think about third world countries or undeveloped places, it's just out of pure infrastructure, whether you've got access to the internet or clean water, sewer, roadways, transportation, just basic infrastructure, has a dramatic effect, I guess, an impact in a society's or an area population ability
Yeah.
to advance itself to a point where they can create or result somebody like an Einstein or a Musk or somebody like, you never get to have the opportunity to have these people excel to then create kind of um, just an extreme amount of value in a culture and in business or service that impacts everybody. Like, so if you think about like, that's why you have everybody condensed over into Silicon Valley who's in the tech industry, or everybody who's in the petrochem industry is kind of down here, or everybody who's in certain different industries kind of collect themselves into clusters. And then, it drives a tremendous amount of value. I mean, it's with the tech sector alone, how many billionaires do you have in the San Francisco Bay Area around tech? And then
Yeah.
the byproduct of that is a bunch of software assets that then get exported globally at a tremendous value. So then you have like your economy, at least the US economy, a large chunk of it is going to be driven by the export software products that we make, right?
Yeah.
And if San Francisco didn't have the infrastructure that it does, both basic infrastructure and then also infrastructure in certain types of educational, colleges and things and businesses that then promote that kind of, ability and skill to build those software assets, then you don't get that value that is then derived from all the exports that they make.
Yeah. And
So,
when I think infrastructure, I think things like And I think we're kind of saying the same thing. I think specifically utilities and transportation type of projects.
Yeah.
With a guy like Elon, we've talked a number of times about, what he's doing in the transportation sector with with just Tesla in general. He's obviously just released the van or bus looking thing. Uh, it's pretty clear that down the road, there's going to be a very different means of transportation, or what transportation looks like will be very different than what it is now. And he, I think, is leading that significantly. From the utilities perspective, obviously he's got, Starlink, which is up and running and proven to be tremendously successful, though it was stifled quite a bit by the last administration. I think you'll see it kind of take off here with
Well,
its ability to service
yeah, I mean, Starlink
from
alone,
from
right?
a
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. And I was just gonna make one more point, which is like he owns the Boring Company as well. And there's been a lot of talk, I know, in the last couple of years about high speed rail projects, whether they be above or below ground. And I think a guy like Elon, could probably very quickly play in that space if he's not already in some manner. I know that there's been a few rail projects that we've called high speed that don't even touch the type of speed that you're seeing in other countries. So I would think that those are all three sort of opportunities. When I think infrastructure, like I said, I think transportation, whether it be vehicular or by rail. I think utilities, specifically in this case, probably high speed internet,
Well,
to wherever you can get it. But I hear you point loud and clear too about, there's been a lot of talk specifically in the Trump administration about goods, imported goods, and there's the whole tariff thing's been thrown around quite a bit. I think the whole point is that Trump would like to see manufacturing, really resuscitated here in the United States. In order to do that, in order to bring some of these factories, big manufacturing jobs back into this country, I think you have to have a certain type of infrastructure to do that here as well, which is probably a little bit transportation, a little bit utility. Um, but I think those are all things I think from an infrastructure perspective could be impacted by this term.
yeah, I think I mean, just back on the internet thing. I think
Yeah.
one of the biggest differences between the administrations, and this is kind of where I'm hoping like maybe all infrastructure investment or just where the tax dollars go for infrastructure, because you've got Starlink, which won the rural I can't remember the name of the actual program, but they won a bid to provide internet connectivity to rural areas. I think it was under like the broadband equity access deployment. I think they call it BEAD. Yeah, the BEAD program.
Hmm.
Um, so you have a situation where like, hey, so the government knows there is a need for high speed internet connectivity in areas of the country that don't have it. And they say, we're going to take some tax dollars and we're going to use that to invest in this infrastructure because
Right.
these rural areas need this. And the value that would eventually have as output from these areas would be great. So it's worth the investment.
Yep.
And then basically Starlink, an Elon company, bids on it, wins the bid. They win it. Like,
Yep.
we could
Yep.
do it, right? And we could deploy it right now. And out of I guess political reasons, it was pulled from them,
That's a nice way
right?
to put it.
So yeah, and so you've got the concept of
And even
it's
having the
weird.
rug pulled out from under their feet, they were more wildly successful than the program that was implemented, which I
Well, no,
think,
I don't think there is a program. I don't think one person has been
well,
connected. Like it's
yeah,
almost
well,
like
that's what I'm trying that I
yeah.
was trying to be nice about it. But yeah, I mean,
Oh,
there was a program I think that they tried to implement that did not connect a single. person is what is what we're hearing. And so it sounds like Starlink was much more successful at that. So
Well,
I
my
think
thing is like it's kind of funny because like the government knows the value of the need to invest in that kind of infrastructure, and so
yeah.
they put it out to the market. There should have been no political bias as to like what the reward what the rewarded company could do and the outcome of how to achieve it. They should have been like, this is great. Now we have Starlink in these areas, and not only did we provide service, we provided it overnight for a fraction of the cost of what it was projected to be at to begin with. If they would have gone with hardwire infrastructure and have to do that over the course of several years. I was actually on so what I'm hoping for is that at least the Trump administration is that the political bias, part of the evaluation of award for infrastructure investment just gets thrown out the window. It's like there's a need,
Yeah.
somebody can facilitate the need with a service, and then it's like go do that service and just get the result
Well,
done
and
quickly.
we talked, yeah, we talked, well, quickly, that's what I was just going to say is we talked about deregulation right off the bat, right? So these two things kind of go hand in hand, infrastructure and deregulation. I mean, I think as you know, some of these infrastructure projects, we've talked about this in the past when we're doing a lot of public-private partnership type stuff, is that these size deals take a long time typically to gain enough momentum to get going. And a lot of that time can be attributed to regulation, over regulation. Some of it has something to do with sometimes the financing, in terms of are there incentives, what do the rates look like, what kind of investment do we have? But there a lot of times it's just upfront. It's just these big infrastructure projects have a lot of different regulatory requirements that tend to slow them down tremendously.
Well, it's it just keeping on the Starlink topic. It's a situation where I was at LSU game in a suite, and there was I don't know the guy's name or what company he works for, but I overhear him talking about he's in the, let's call it the old school way of internet infrastructure,
Mhm.
right? They
Yeah.
invest in hardwire, they trench lines, they do all this stuff. And somebody was asking him about Starlink. And is it good? You know, is it going to replace kind of the traditional method? And this guy was like, no, there's no way. Like it's costs too much to manage Starlink, and you got the satellites, they fall onto lower orbit and they burn up and you got to replace them. And it's just so his mindset was like it costs too much to to maintain a system that would be competitive or better than the system that he's in. I kept quiet. I behaved myself this time around. So I'm
Yeah.
sure my wife would be happy that I kept my mouth shut. But it's like the fact that that person doesn't even like recognize that the way that Starlink even works today is it's going to continually get better and better and better because the deployment of the satellites into space via SpaceX, the Starship, it's going to lower the cost of getting these things to orbit over time.
Yeah.
And then which plays into like the over regulation that the government has on SpaceX of like preventing it from running its rockets. It's like let
Yeah.
SpaceX run all his rockets, let them get that Starlink, the Starship system down, so then it reduces the overall payload costs to things into outer space like Starlink and other stuff, to where then like the deployment of Starlink becomes fractionally like the cost of what it is today, and then get more Starlink satellites in lower orbit, which then increases the coverage, which then has the ability to decongest the system, which then increases the bit rate of usage and then decreases the latency of usage. So it's like, if they would just get off SpaceX's back about
Well,
having to
so yeah,
shelter
that's
it's like seals' ears because they might hear it, or a shark that gets disrupted by a rocket. It's like let him get his rocket out there, let him get that honed in. You get more Starlink satellites up in the air, And then that's going to decrease the cost to everybody. It's going to increase the quality to everybody. And then you're going to have, imagine this, then he's going to have billions of people paying a subscription to Starlink. So the more subscribers, the lower the cost because you can defray that cost operationally much better with the more users, which then at some point, like we're all going to have Starlink internet to everywhere, and it's going to basically be damn near free for like the best connectivity ever. And it's all because of both political like warfare or gaming against the guy and his companies and overregulation that is stifling this potential extreme value add service or product to humanity.
Yeah.
It's
So I look,
I'm
like I said,
like,
my point is that like I think those two topics, the deregulation as well as the support for infrastructure projects, those are sort of linked together, right? And I think that the real benefit here that this or the real opportunity that this administration has is that they've got, at the risk of sounding like an Elon fanboy here, they've got an innovator, right, who has proven that in spite of you know over regulation, let's just call it that, he's been able to iterate very quickly and successfully and play the game. And I think what's going to be interesting is if they're able to cut some of that regulation and some of that inefficiency out. um, I think you could see the speed of some of these infrastructure projects really take off and really benefit, a lot of people. So I think that's a huge opportunity.
well, and also if you think about place, like I mean, I'll admit to it, I'm an Elon fanboy. Elon Musk, I'm a fanboy. You can, email me, call me, whatever, we'll hang out. It's like I don't care. I own his cars, I own his stock. I'll buy. I'm looking at dropping AT&T for Starlink, even if it costs. I was like,
Yeah, look,
it
I just
costs
wanted
it.
to be clear that like
Yeah,
this podcast is not sponsored by Starlink or Tesla, even though we've mentioned them like
it
hundreds
can
of
be.
times. I don't. Yeah, it can be. I'm not turning that down. I'm just saying that rather than talk specifically about Elon's projects, I just wanted to say that I think that the reduction in regulatory environment, or basically the efficiency of the process, could be very beneficial for large infrastructure projects. Could be beneficial for
But if you,
small projects too. But you've
well,
got a
there's
guy
a,
like Elon who's a proven innovator in the face
well,
of overregulation. Like turn that guy loose without the chains and see how fast he can make things happen.
the brilliance of it. Yeah, look, it's all about Elon for a reason, right? He's intentionally gone into industries and has created companies that the target of his efforts is to benefit humanity as much as possible. So you can pull the thread on any company he has and find out how it benefits humanity, in as much in the biggest way as possible. Because like even like housing, right? Elon is not in housing, affordable housing. Let's just call it affordable housing, right? That's a big problem. Well, how has Elon? We could do a whole podcast series called "How Has Elon Affected Everything?" And it's
7 degrees
but
of Elon.
yeah, 7 degrees of Elon. So the let's just go to the Tesla and the Boring Company and Starlink all have a potential direct impact on housing and affordability. One, it's all, if you want to, let's just say you work in, pick a city. Let's call it Nashville, right? Random city. And well, let me go some of that we're more familiar with. New York and Boston, East Coast, large metropolitan East Coast, right? It is staggeringly impossible to afford anything. I know multi-millionaires, like multi-millionaires that live paycheck to paycheck because they got to pay for housing. Now, their housing is nicer than other people's housing, but It's almost like it doesn't matter how much you make because you're going to end up getting it's all going to end up being spent on some kind of version of a basic service, right? Housing, whatever. Now, if you had the boring company, right? I think Elon even proposed a tunnel from DC to New York. I think that's what it was. Um, you can extend a tunnel from, let's say, New York to, um, somewhere up and around Albany. And you've got the boring tunnel and you've got Teslas that go in and out. So your commute time through a boring tunnel in a Tesla from, say, upstate New York to center of Manhattan is quicker and cheaper than any other form of transportation. It may even be cheaper. I mean, I used to live on the Upper East Side, right? So it'd take me, let's call it, for go from 87th Street down to Union Square into my office, I would have to budget about 20 to 30 minutes and, walk to a train station, get on a train, do the whole thing, walk away, blah, 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 right? But what if you can get from somewhere far out on Long Island or upstate New York through a boring tunnel straight to Union Square, and you're already in the car, and it's faster and cheaper than getting on a subway when you live inside the city. So then you can live somewhere more affordable and then get transported quicker and cheaper to your place of work and back. And it's quicker than if you lived near your place of work anyway. I'll kind of apply that to everywhere, right? It's
Yep.
even where we are in Baton Rouge. Like, would you rather buy a house? Now, if you're looking for pure cost, I mean, there's advantages and disadvantages with living in an urban area and rural area, depending on what individuals like. But let's say I didn't want to live in the city anymore. And I wanted to live on 20 acres, 30 minutes out of the city, and um, but where it's a lot more affordable. So the house I have in the city, I can buy 20 acres and a nice house and have all the stuff out in the country. Now that I have a Tesla that has full self-driving, I don't have to worry about the commute. I literally was talking, was with another friend who lives 40 minutes outside the city, and he was sitting there looking at his clock. It's like 11:30 at night, and he's like, "Man, I got to drive all the way out to my house. It's 45-minute drive." And I'm like, "Well, if you had a Tesla, you could just push a button and then let your car drive you. You don't have to worry about being fatigued and driving as safe as you normally would because now you can just get chauffeured out to your house. Same thing with, the internet. Let's say you work from home. You don't need to be in your office, but you want to live in the middle of, Utah where there's no internet. Well, now you've got Starlink and you can live and work there to your company in Miami because you can work remote. So I think it opens the whole point of that is it opens up the reach of where people can live and still have careers and jobs in places that they can't afford, and they don't have to go sacrifice their living conditions to have that job because now they can work and live somewhere. They can work and live somewhere else that's more affordable, but have the career um, that the larger metropolitan area would provide that they no longer can afford to live in that metropolitan area. Now, obviously, it doesn't apply to every kind of career, but for a lot of people, that it's those possibilities start to become possible because of companies like what Elon has made. And it kind of all goes back to infrastructure. So, like, if you think about it, like all of his companies are somehow related to massive transformative infrastructure that then affects most people's lives in a positive way.
Mhm.
So,
Well, so we talked. I mean, I was trying to draw a correlation between infrastructure projects and regulation. You mentioned tax incentives, interest rates, inflation. You touched on foreign investment. I think you were sort of alluding to trade policy there. Um, we talked about a lot of things. I think that could be advantageous. That'll come out of this administration for our industry. Anything negative on your mind? I mean, uh, I was
I
trying to
think
think.
yeah,
Are there any?
the negatives could be how the tariff situation's handled, right?
Mhm,
So, yes, tariffs. and look, I don't know everything there's about tariffs and history and all these things, and I'm going to make a very an uneducated kind of ramble about the whole thing. So I want to say, and I'm sure somebody can correct me on this, but because we used to not have income tax, right?
That's
And
the podcast,
and
ladies and gentlemen, summed up by Chris. Uneducated ramble.
uneducated ramble. We'll have the that could maybe that could be the title, the
Yeah,
uneducated ramble episode.
yeah,
The so I think because we used to have a significant amount of revenue for the United States. I think it was like what late 1800s, early 1900s. Like we had more money than we knew what to do with, right? And there was committees that were put in place to figure out how to spend the money. This is back when we used to do things like world fairs and I think after the wars, the whole idea of the tariffs, but again, I'm totally uneducated on this. I'm just kind of guessing, but I think the concept, the intent was like, we know your country's got messed up. We can't just cut you checks, right? But maybe through tariffs in a relationship and trade, you tariff us, and that revenue will then help help those countries that got destroyed invest in infrastructure and rebuild over time.
mm,
And that's why we didn't necessarily tariff them, right? It's because our country didn't get messed up. And again, I'm probably way off here, but this is just me really connecting some fuzzy dots and just assumptions. But then I think in part, obviously, let's see who imposed the income tax. I think it was RFK. Um, Pretty sure it was RFK. Let's see, not RFK. Sorry, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Um, that's it. No, okay, that's wrong too. See, look, totally uneducated. Let's see. First, yeah, income tax in the United States was imposed during the Civil War, the Revenue Act of 1861, but it was not. See, it was ratified in the 16th Amendment, Constitution Amendment. Okay, federal government authority, blah blah blah. Who was the president at the time? Woodrow Wilson. Wow. Okay. Anyway, so I think the obviously the need to have us tariffed around the world for our exports is really not there anymore, right? If the intent was to just help these countries rebuild and kind of restabilize the globe, so that needs to be kind of rebalanced out. And I think a negative thing that could happen is if Trump, I know he wants to do that, but if he does it at an extreme level across the board all at once, well, then of course it's going to drive
be a big
up
strain.
inflation, right?
Yep.
Things will cost more. Your $5 trinket from China is going to cost $15, right, or $10. So
Yeah.
I think with anything though, it's probably look if you're just you know not somebody who takes everything literal. It's what he's. If I had to guess what he's doing, he's probably saying like, "Hey, this is an issue that we're going to rebalance. There's a lot of opportunity here to now adjust the scales of tariffs globally in the benefit of the United States. And if I was negotiating the deal, I would say, I'm going to tariff everybody, right? 1,000%. And they're all going to call me and say, no, please don't do that. Let's strike a new deal. So then you kind of like position an opportunity to then negotiate a new deal. And it's probably not going to be as overly tariffed as what he was talking about in his campaigns. It's going to be negotiated and discussed, and then a reasonable outcome would come to where it's beneficial for both parties, as long as America has equal or better benefit over the New Deal. Um, so if he doesn't handle that right, the tariff situation, then I think that could be negative. Um, so that would be one negative.
Yeah.
As far as an interesting thing was it Mexico China was going to build that massive auto plant in Mexico, and even Tesla was going to build an auto plant in Mexico. I think all of those plans have now been shut down.
Yeah, so
And
that's one of the things I was going to bring up from or maybe related to where you're headed with this, but on a much smaller scale. I mean, we saw, at least on some of our projects several years back, when there was an announcement related to illegal immigration and some deportation activity. We saw a lot of the subcontractor market sort of disappear overnight, and the cost and the time frame uh, both increase on on that those services. So um, I think that could be something. And now it was short term, right? It ended up rebounding pretty quick, but if you had projects going on at the time, in some cases, like you know, people just stopped answering the phone, or they didn't have you know, two or three separate concrete crews now, they had one, or they didn't have two or three or four
Mhm.
framing crews, they had a half a crew, you know. Um, so there was some labor market issues for a hot minute. The last time there was some of that going on. Again, like I said, it rebounded pretty quickly, but I think we could see that on the construction side a little bit again here. With some of the policy that's being discussed.
This is it's so timely. Like, the X feed is open while we're on this call or this podcast, and literally just posted on X, just dropped new policy promises from Trump. The This is wild. It says, I'm not going to read them all, but one is literally transportation. We will lead the way in air and mobility to develop vertical takeoff
Right.
and landing vehicles for families. Flying cars. He's bring flying fucking cars.
Hey, let's bring it on.
Yeah. So now the boring tunnel that's out the window. Just you fly
Yep.
over it.
Yep.
The
Crazy.
and then you've got uh here's another one. He talks about the cost of living, major initiatives for lowering cost of living, building new homes. Doesn't go into how necessarily, but um, again, looking at these old these old American communities that have died off, now revitalizing for industry to manufacture things that were once in China or currently in China. But this one is pretty cool. But this one would be great, actually. Congress to support baby bonuses for young parents to help them launch a baby boom. So I don't know, maybe you get money if you have babies. So I think you're a little early on that one, Stuart.
Yeah, we missed that one. I think you and I missed that one.
I just have the one. I can do still
Well,
could do some
yeah,
more. Then this is a cool one too.
we had a
Launch
couple
and
back there, but yeah, they're not
maybe
necessarily babies
maybe
anymore.
maybe retroactive. I wonder if it could be retroactive.
Yeah.
Let's see. Launch and modernize and beautification campaign. Get rid of ugly buildings, refurbish parks and public spaces, make cities and towns more livable. I mean, look, it's a pretty broad and undefined claims, but it's pretty hilarious that it's just like get rid of ugly buildings. There's a lot of ugly buildings. That's funny.
Yeah, well,
But I mean, look, with massive change and volatility, right, comes opportunity. So I think
yeah,
personally, the more that the Trump administration and Congress can basically impose real impactful change, almost indifferent for good or bad, hopefully for good, the change action alone will promote additional action from industry across the board, which would then create opportunity for individuals, which means people have things to do
yep,
and get paid for it. I mean, as dumb and basic as that is, that's kind of how it works, right? Nothing really happens. Everybody just kind of sits back, stifled and paralyzed. So it's almost like just make a decision, right? The decision doesn't need to be the right one or the wrong one. Just a decision needs to be made so that you can just keep going in some path of momentum. So we'll see what happens. It's I'm sure over the next few months, a lot of these policies will get published and further defined and refined over time. Um, and we can pick them apart as they get posted. But I do love the fact where he's just like, all right, we're gonna have flying cars and we're gonna get rid of ugly buildings. Yes, that sounds awesome.
That should be the
Uh,
title of this episode: Flying Cars and Ugly Buildings.
yeah, and what ignorant assumptions, or what do I say? Uneducated
Yeah,
guesses. I don't know.
uneducated. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uneducated,
But
rambling, flying cars, and ugly buildings.
yeah, so I guess as scattered-minded as this episode has been, I think the big takeaways is probably, you know, we'll probably see a lot of money and effort go into some critical infrastructure, both physical and just probably space with Starlink and other connectivity communications, and then which would help a lot of people a great deal. And then also um, probably tax and investment policy and innovation policy, what it sounds like with flying cars, right? That could change the landscape of what real estate assets and construction design. I mean, think about like just from a designer standpoint, if you're an engineer and architect, and all of a sudden you've got to deal with flying cars, like that changes the whole building programming completely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was the lobby on the roof now instead of the ground floor. You have two lobbies, right? How's that work? Um, I'm sure somebody will figure it out, and then
Yeah. How
somebody will
about
get paid to
parking?
figure it out.
Parking garages all across cities that take up so much space, parking lots. I mean, what if you don't need those anymore? Opens up a lot of
Yeah,
real estate.
we talked about that last week, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's
Look, I took a studio course when I was in graduate school that dealt specifically with the impact of the automobile on the residents on housing. And there were some really cool projects that came out of that. It was co-taught by a guy named Chris Bangle, who at the time was the chief designer at the BMW group, which was Rolls-Royce, BMW, and Mini Cooper. I mean, incredible, incredible guy, just great thinker, great artist too. I mean, the guy could sit down and draw anything at the drop of a hat. I mean, it was really incredible. But he's no longer in the auto industry, but he had a huge impact on the industry at the time, and it was really cool that he was teaming up with an architect, a German architect, to teach this course. Thinking about the way that the automobile and the house are linked together, and I think we could see another revolution in that pretty soon, as this administration seems to be indicating.
I hope so, especially if these 43 monkeys that escaped get everybody. Did you see
Yeah,
this? I
yeah,
just
yeah.
43. Like how did 43 monkeys escaped who are test monkeys for vaccine deployment or development? Just 43 of them just walked out the door into the wilderness. Who knows what they got?
Yeah.
I mean, like, what? I don't know. Well, if you see
Let's
a
wrap on the
monkey,
monkeys.
stay away. Yeah.
I'm planning to just see a mouse or two in the next week or so.
Yep. All right. We'll close it out.
All right, we'll see you next time.